5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Throughout the last half-century, space has been a topic of deep discussion in the United States and many other countries alike. Together, my team and I will be analyzing some of space's most profound mysteries and theories and discussing what space travel has in store from now on to the future. Today, we wish to bring you all on a journey through space and expose all of you to space exploration throughout the ages. Welcome to the space race.
The Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite as it passed over New York earlier today.
I think Sputnik 1 was an interesting start to the space race. While it wasn't as sophisticated as modern spacecraft, it was a very big deal at the time. No man-made object had ever been shot up into space before, much less orbit the entire Earth itself.
True. Yes, I do have to agree with there, Jamie. The Soviet Union truly proved himself with this remarkable feat. This unofficial start to the space race began in the fall of 1957, the same time the Cold War was still fuming with tension between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Tensions then were very high, Ronnie. This action exposed the world to the Soviet Union's new technology, making themselves seem almost superior to the United States.
And let me tell you, Mark, the U.S. was not happy about this new test for power. It was crucial that the United States not lose too much ground to the Soviets. We soon realized space could be used militarily, and that the Soviet Union could now get a nuclear weapon over U.S. airspace.
With that new threat in mind, the U.S. urgently began to gather any intelligence surrounding Soviet military activities.
It was also around this time, about 1 year later, that President Dwight D. Eisenhower created the federal agency NASA, or more specifically, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. This organization is still the leading space exploration organization in the entire country.
Space was obviously a hot topic at this time, which is most likely due to the hostility between the two nations. Only 3 weeks later did the U.S. Army design the Explorer 1 with the help from rocket scientist Wernher von Braun.
Explorer is in orbit, broadcasting to the world its coded scientific data. Cosmic ray intensity, meteor impact, solar radiation. These are the dry facts that will help carry man ever farther into the age of space.
However, it wasn't until the Soviet Union sent the first human into space with the Vostok 1 that things really started to heat up. Yuri Gagarin was the first human being to ever be sent up into space. If it weren't for him and his crew's successful mission, the space race probably would have not been as high stake and advancing as it was.
Good point, Mark. Soviets sending men around the Earth's atmosphere was a large landmark in space exploration history.
I couldn't agree more, Jamie. It wasn't until 3 weeks later that Alan Shepard, an American astronaut, was sent into space with the Freedom 7. But it did not orbit the Earth like the Soviets had already accomplished.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it was almost a year after this that the Friendship 7 had sent up to space, making John Glenn the first American to orbit the Earth in February of 1962.
And even after all this, it still wasn't enough. Before the Friendship 7 even launched, President John F. Kennedy put out a statement saying America should be the first country to put a man on the moon. And so the Apollo program was launched, its main goal to put a man on the moon.
It wasn't until 8 years later that the Apollo 11 was launched, and the voyage to space began. It took a total of 3 days for astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins to reach the moon. The Eagle, a lunar module that was supposed to take Buzz and Neil to the moon, had a malfunction, but Neil was able to land it manually on the moon's surface. This is the same time when Neil made his famous quote,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
While this grayish rock might not have helped the world with vital resources or materials, the symbolism behind reaching this satellite planet was all that mattered.
Many civilians in both the United States and the Soviet Union believed that the moon landing was a hoax, this idea originating from in the mid-70s. Many conspiracy theorists believe that it was just a film adaptation of what it might have happened. Even though we are not supposed to be biased in this documentary, we advocate for it not being a hoax.
It's honestly quite funny how all theorists like to say how you can see the green screen and microphones hanging, but there is still no solid evidence of any of these theories actually being true.
It was quite an interesting sight to see. Well, on my television, of course.
Yeah, I bet the view from the actual moon was a bit better.
Speaking of the Apollo 11 crew, today we have Neil Armstrong here to interview about the space race. We are deeply thankful and honored that he could be here with us today. So without further ado, let us begin the interview.
Wow, the Neil Armstrong. Thank you so much for coming today, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you all so much for having me. I have always wanted to share my story with the world, and this is the perfect opportunity to do it.
Well, you've come to the right place. Let's get on right underway with this interview.
Sounds great to me.
So, as we were discussing before, there are many people who say that the moon landing was actually faked by the government to trick people into thinking we got to the moon, but we really didn't. Do you have any information to try and persuade those certain citizens, because you have much more experience and knowledge as they do?
Of course, Mark. I'll be glad to shed some light on this topic. Before I get into my experience with being on the moon, I can understand why some people believe this was faked. The US was severely losing to the Soviets in the space race. Getting to the moon before any other country seemed like the only thing to get out of this slump. And it really did. I have heard some people say we faked it to keep our image of superiority and dominance over other countries. And we never really did make it to the moon. And while I understand where they are coming from, I can tell you with 100% certainty that I was on the moon. One of the most popular pieces of evidence is that the shadows from the moon landing were all well lit in parallel, which theorists believed was caused by studio lighting. In order to create that same parallel effect, they would need millions of lasers to evenly distribute all of the light. With normal studio lighting, especially for that time period, the shadows would have diverged. The sun was really the only thing that could provide that same parallel shadows. Not only that, but 400,000 NASA employees all keeping this one secret would have been impossible to keep hidden.
Excellent points, Neil. Couldn't have said it better myself.
On to the next topic. How do you think the space race was related to Cold War tensions between the US and Soviet Union?
Very interesting question there, Jamie. I do believe some of those Cold War controversies did roll over into the space race. Frankly, I don't even think the space race would have occurred if not for the Cold War discussions. Actually getting to the moon was one thing, but outwitting the Soviets and proving to all other countries that America was on top was also in the back of everyone's mind throughout the entire space race. However, these tensions did lead to some remarkable advancements that would probably not even have occurred as quick if not for the pressure from either side. Even though these advances were exponential and incredible for the time, the extreme pressure did lead to some fatal mistakes that caused many astronauts' lives. There were many failed takeoffs and explosions that are not commonly mentioned, but did still occur. These failures show that working under such high stakes do cause terrible disasters. They also demonstrate that time, training, and testing are all necessary when working with space travel, whether there are humans on board or not.
Wow, Neil. Very interesting point you've made. I just have one last question for you. What do you think about the Soviets and United States collaborating on the Apollo-Soyuz project? Do you think it mellowed out the space race a little?
I do think that the United States and the Soviets collaborating was a good thing. While it may have been a controversial topic for some, especially for Red Scare promoters, it sort of started an ending period for the space race, and it might have mellowed out the Cold War in some aspects too. With that being said, I believe that since both the United States and Soviet Union were two of the most powerful countries at the time, the two collaborating was a magnificent idea as they could help accomplish more throughout a shorter period of time.
I think that wraps up everything today, Neil. Thanks for coming on for this interview.
My pleasure.
Circa 1975, NASA programs such as Gemini and Apollo promoted a winning streak for the United States in the space race. In July of 1975, when tensions between the United States and Soviet Union began to crumble, the first United States and Soviet joint mission called the Apollo-Soyuz project was established.
I think that the joint project further proved that the space race was just a byproduct of the Cold War, because after tensions eased and there wasn't as much conflict, almost all interest in space dissolved, and all future ideas about venturing to Mars were silenced.
It really makes you think about how this relationships between the United States and the Soviet Union is like a sports match. Two sides competing to entertain a general audience, with both sides being competitive for no real reason other than their pride.
Most recently, specifically throughout the last 9 or 10 years, many achievements have contributed to a future in space exploration.
I think a very large achievement would have to be the first female shuttle pilot in February of 1995.
Yes, I do agree with you, Jamie. Eileen M. Collins became the first woman to fly on a space shuttle on mission STS-63. Piloting a shuttle as a woman was a huge step, especially for feminists fighting for rights at home.
I personally think that the space satellite Galileo reaching Jupiter's atmosphere in December of 1995 was a huge landmark in space history. Getting pictures of Jupiter's moons was a huge landmark in recent history as well.
Yeah, similarly, I think that the Mars Pathfinder reaching the surface of Mars in 1997 was a major success. And without it, we probably would not be able to see what mysteries were behind Mars' rocky surface.
To work towards a new generation of achievement in astronomy, the new generations will work towards finding new information and even possibly sending humans to Mars. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something today.